This delay annoyed the emperor, who would have liked the publication to have preceded his arrival by some days. He had traveled more rapidly than he realized. Habitually so calm and impassive, His Majesty was now agitated by so many diverse emotions, regrets and hopes. He had such happiness before him and had left such misery behind that he could not hide his feelings. After talking for some considerable time about the various things that filled his mind, he returned for the third time to our adventure at Eisenach. He could not understand the behavior of the postmaster, who had been warned a long time in advance and knew that the horses were for a distinguished traveler. The place, the hour, everything rendered his conduct suspicious. The emperor ordered me to write to Baron Saint-Aignan, instructing him to obtain precise information regarding the motives for the man's behavior and to complain to the government if necessary. He was to make his report at once. As it is a personal matter, added the emperor, I do not wish the postmaster to be arrested now, nor to be dismissed, but it would be satisfactory to know there was no intrigue at the back of it. The conversation returned to affairs in general. What the emperor had said to me about the King of Naples' schemes for a united Italy gave me a chance to speak of Rome and the Pope. I deprecated the latter's activity, which I told him created a bad effect everywhere, even though Christendom no longer drew the sword to back up the thunders of the Vatican. The emperor agreed that it was an unpleasant business. He said, in removing the Pope from Rome for the time being, I had thought to get him away from some bad advice. I should perhaps have done better to leave him there. My government is strong enough in Italy to make even the priests feel it. To this coup d'etat, nonetheless, I owe the tranquility in that country has enjoyed for the past year. The English have not stopped pouring money in there to start at least partial insurrections, and they have miscarried. Not even the most timid consciousness, if their owners wished to be fair-minded, could find anything more than a political difference in my disputes with the Pope. The Church has me to thank for the reestablishment of the true faith in France, perhaps for its survival in Europe, and I am surely as good a Catholic as Charles V was, who also carried off a pope without becoming a heretic in consequence. If I had followed the advice of several very enlightened men at the moment when I restored religion, I should not have made myself dependent on Rome. They suggested alternatives to me. I might have done like the czars, have created a sort of patriarch and made myself head of the church, or at least its protector, as the king of Prussia is of Protestantism. Speaking of that, everybody's Protestant now, since no one goes to confession anymore. The other alternative was a form of permanent council or committee of bishops for the administration of matters spiritual. In fact, a Gallican church. That would have changed no usages, and so would have offended none of the devout, for no one would have known the nature of my accountings with Rome. Now, the emperor added, it is indispensable to establish the Pope in France and to bring the cardinals there, so as to have the sacred college under one's influence. This preference belongs to France. Her papist population forms the largest clientele the Pope has. He would then find himself in the midst of his flock. Where should I be now if the Pope had died? And this sensible, moderate successor to the chief apostle had been replaced by an Austrian or an Italian, angry and ultramontane, as would inevitably have been the case. The clergy, he said, is a power that is never quiet. Against you, unless it is for you. It serves none free of charge. You cannot be under obligations to it, wherefore you must be its master. Before it can be the auxiliary of government, it has to be its friend. And to secure that, the clergy must have its rights clearly defined. With me, its pretensions can come to nothing. But after me, they could cause disorder. God has given me the strength to undertake great things and to delight in them. I must not leave them incomplete. The clergy must be restricted to reconciling us with heaven, to consoling our women and us when we grow old, and must surrender to us the power of this world. Roi dans le temple, sujet à la porte. King in the temple, subject at the door. The army and Poland furnished inexhaustible topics of the conversation. 2 army couriers with the news of the happenings during the 60 hours that succeeded our departure reached us one after the other. The King of Naples and Berthier reported that the rout continued. The intensity of the cold had caused many to desert the colors, even many of the guard. But there was nothing to prepare us for the events that were to follow. Nothing even that might have made us foresee them. The emperor was well aware that his departure would have increased the disorder to some extent, and that it would affect the guard more than the other corps. But as Vilna was the goal that everyone was striving for, it mattered little to him whether the men reached there singly or with their units. As the issue of rations and clothing were only to be made to men with the colors, he appeared certain of being able to rally the army. His dispatches confirmed him more than ever in the opinion that the army would hold Vilna. It was in vain that I combated this view. He jested and laughed at my arguments, which he called misgivings. You see everything in its worst light, he said. Nothing but the actual outcome of events was able to undeceive him. At that moment, he was more than ever filled with hopes. To find himself back in France seemed to signalize the return of his good fortunes. He had a presentiment that his star was again in the ascendant, and certain of being able to control events, he could think no more about the disasters which, 40 hours previously, he had been able to face as clearly as I did. Towards Harville, we overtook Fagalda, one of our grooms, who had not been able to get beyond Mar-le-Tour. At Saint-Jean, the front axle tree of our carriage broke, some 500 paces from the post house. The emperor took his place beside me in a little open cabriolet, which had served for the courier who had followed us. We had to give up our heavy cloaks, as there was no room for them. Since leaving Fulda, we had noticed a great difference in the temperature. It was in this crocon that we drove to Meaux. Only Amadrou had remained with us, and he still had the energy to ride ahead of us and order horses, though we were driving as though the devil were behind us. The emperor had been recognized at Mayence. The postilions told everyone who he was, but the postmasters would only believe it when they saw him for themselves. As for the postilions, they whirled us onward like men certain in advance of the Napoleon that I was to give to each. It was impossible to convey an idea of the eagerness exhibited by the stable hands and postmaster. Immediately on our arrival, at the beginning of the stage, when they heard from the men who had brought us that it was the emperor himself and not merely the master of horse, as our advance courier had announced. From Metz onward, we thought we had come into spring. The ice had given place to a horrible mud. At Meaux, the postmaster gave us his own chaise that closed properly and took us right to the Tuileries. Since leaving Clay, poor Amadrou, overcome by drowsiness rather than by fatigue, kept swaying in the saddle, and I had to encourage him every moment. At the sound of my voice, he would wake up with renewed energy. At last, the moment arrived when he was to ride ahead into the courtyard and hand us out at the Tuileries. Without being told to do so, and before the mounted sentinels had time to challenge him, the postilion drove up at a gallop through the Arc de Triomphe. That's a good sign, the emperor said to me. Safe and sound, he got out at the main gateway, just as the clock was striking the quarter before midnight, December 18th, 1812. I had unbuttoned my overcoat far enough to show the braid of my uniform. The sentries, taking us for dispatch officers, let us pass, and so we got through to the door, open gallery that overtook the gardens. The porter, who had gone to bed, came out with a lamp in his hand and dressed only in his shirt to see who was knocking. Our faces looked so strange to him that he called his wife. I had to repeat my name 3 or 4 times over before I could persuade them to open the door. Nor was it without difficulty and a lot of blinking. She stuck the lamp right into my face, that either of them knew who I was. Then she unlocked, while he was calling one of the regular footmen. The empress had just retired. I asked to be shown into the quarters of her ladies in waiting, ostensibly to give her word that the emperor would follow me, as was our custom. All this time, the porter and the rest of them were looking over the emperor from head to foot. "It's the emperor," one of them shouted. I cannot tell you how pleased they were. They could scarcely contain themselves.